Hello, everybody. My name is Dion Woods, and this is Wealth Channels. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. This week, we're going to do something a little different. And I'm going to start it off with a story that sort of hopefully sets up why we're going to talk about what we're going to do today. So when I was in my late 20s, almost, I think maybe 29 years of age, I remember my wife and I were in a one-bedroom, 800 square foot apartment. We had one child and another one was on the way. And I remember literally it had to be a couple of years walking up and down the streets of the neighborhood where we lived around the corner from our apartment and just seeing all of these families and homes. And every day I would walk and just say to myself, how in the world am I ever going to be able to afford a house? It was so frustrating. I remember I had a good salary, I had a good job, but it wasn't enough to meet the need to be able to get a home. In general, I just found like it was just really hard. And I remember walking and I came across this guy who was cutting his lawn in the front yard. And I walked up to him and I said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I ask you a question?" And he said, "Sure." And I asked him straight out. I said, "How did you get here, man? Like, how did you get to this house and where you are financially, if you don't mind me asking? It's a beautiful home." And he was so kind as to sit back and to share a couple of things that I found to be very true that have helped me later in life. And it's so funny because the advice that he gave, I found myself giving the same advice. Here I am today, blessed to live in a very nice house in a nice neighborhood. And occasionally I would get a service worker, somebody coming and doing work at the house. And it's usually somebody in their 20s or 30s. And they're like, "Do you mind if I ask you a question? How did you get here? How did you get this?" And I laugh to myself and say, man. And so this is sort of the reason why I'm doing this session today. It's like, how do you get there from here? That's the name of the session. And I'm going to cover the biggest financial issues that people face in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm 60 years old now, so I believe I can do it. I can be a progressive parent and talk about what needs to be done for this younger generation. Hopefully you'll find some value in it. I'll speak to what I've experienced and, of course, what I see my own children experience. And more importantly, hopefully give some solutions and maybe some advice like the guy gave me that ultimately might help you in your financial journey. So if you're ready to dig in, let's do it. Okay, so let's start with people in their 20s and 30s, early 30s, 20 years of age to maybe 29, 31 years of age. Like, what is the most pressing financial issue that generation faces? And if you're in that age group and you're watching, you're going to say, what issue don't we face, dude? I get it. But I would say if I had to characterize one major thing, it's a lack of earning power. Money. Like, we can talk about budgeting and balancing checkbooks all day, but if you don't have any money to balance or money to put into a checkbook, balancing it is irrelevant. The biggest issue is being able to generate money. And this generation has a challenge, like being able to just earn money. And in general, what I have found is that you are paid in life for what you know and what you can produce and the value you create. And when you're young, you just haven't done any of those things. You haven't had a chance to build anything of significance. And so your earning potential and power is obviously limited. And of course, hey, if you're a certain kind of engineer and certain kinds of career professions, that's going to be a little bit different. You're going to be able to have more to work with. But according to most studies, people in their 24 to 29 years of age, their average salary, median salary is something like $41,000 a year. By the time they get to maybe 30, 31, 32, it goes up to 60, but that's really difficult to live off of. And if you're in that age group, you're like, preach, don't I know it? So the biggest issue is trying to create a sense of earning power, earning more money. And I know it's the biggest issue. If you look at most studies, 2 years ago, I think it was Pew who did a research and study and said something like almost 50+% of Gen Z are dependent upon their parents for financial support. Like, over half of all Gen Z is dependent on their parents for financial support in some way. And it's because they just don't make enough money for how they're living. We'll talk about that in a moment. But a more recent study was done and that number has dropped. It's dropped down to something like, I guess, somewhere around 35% are still dependent on their parents. What happened? What happened between 24 and 26 that so many young people, 24 to 31, 32 years of age, suddenly are less dependent on their parents than maybe they were just 2 years prior? Well, they're learning to do what their parents had to do. They had to cut back. They had to say, I can't do that this time. And that was a real challenge, I think, in 24 for them to say it. But they recognize, hey, I can't live off of mom and dad forever. I've got to be an adult and I've got to make some decisions. And most of those decisions centered around cutting things that I don't do. The other thing is they stepped up in side hustles. They're doing all kinds of little things to earn extra money. They're doing what every generation before. You have to find a way to make it happen. The other thing that study said, which is I found very interesting, is it said they're also dating less. I think it was something like 50% of Gen Z said they don't spend any money on dates now. That's probably another whole podcast, I'm sure. So you're coming out of college, right? You're suddenly now you got to rent an apartment. You're finding out, that's really difficult, right? You got a car payment. You of course, I mentioned student loans. You've got all these other expenses, and you're like, my gosh, I don't make enough. How in the world am I going to be able to do it? So you know the challenges that you have. I don't have to restate all of those. So what's the solution? So I got some good news and I got some bad news. I'll also go with the bad news first. The bad news is that there's no easy solution to that, right? But the good news is there is a solution. It's just not easy. And it starts with the way you think. Basically, the advice that I was given early that ultimately helped me later, and the one I'm going to give you now, is that when you're in your 20s and your early 30s, you have to prioritize learning over living. Yeah, you have to prioritize learning over living. What do I mean? Basically, coming out, you're like, hey, I want to enjoy life. I want to do things. I want to explore. That's cool. That's all great. But the thing you need to most focus on when you're that age is learning, because you're paid in life by what you know and the value you produce, what you create. And so you have to spend that time doing it. I remember I was interviewing a young guy on my team a couple of years ago, and we were having a discussion around what the salary was for the job. And we were offering X, and he was coming back, and I'm not mad at him for it, but he was like, hey, I think I deserve more. The challenge is that the only experience he had was that he went to college. This was his first job, right? And so he wanted something like $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 more. And I gave him this piece of advice, maybe to help you. I told him, listen, when you're getting your first job, you have to pay the cost to learn. And after you learn, then you can charge somebody else for what you've learned. But for now, take the benefit of learning what I could teach you, what this job can show you, and then later on, go charge somebody else for the knowledge that you gain here. But it's very difficult to go and step up and talk about earning more when you haven't learned more. So you have to start there first. You have to start with learning. What do you know? And if you aren't spending a good chunk of your time focused in that area, you're going to find it very, very difficult to get through or past the issue of not having enough. Like, not having enough can stay with you like a birthmark for the rest of your life if you have not mastered and grown in the area of what you know. And that's a lifelong process. Like classes, AI classes, whatever it is that you need to do, you've got to be a sponge and learn more, because that will be the greatest solution to the problem of not having enough. Yes, you can cut back in expenses, and there's tons of stuff that talk about how to do that. You know what you need to cut back on. You don't need to go and have every streaming service, right? You know that you don't need to go on every single trip. You know all of those things. But what is going to be most helpful and most impactful to you at that age is being able to learn and grow, because what you know is what you monetize. And if you don't know anything, you can't monetize it. So be a sponge, learn. That's the biggest piece of advice that I would give anybody in their 20s to their, early 30s. I mean, it's a lifelong lesson, but take that. Ask yourself, what am I doing right now to learn and to grow? Who am I trying to learn from? What mentors can I gain information from? Who can I connect with to be able to understand more? And if the circle of people around you, if you don't have people who know more than you, that's probably going to be a problem. Nobody gets better by being with people who are less, who produce less, who know less, who understand less. You won't grow in that environment. So you have to step out of your comfort zone and learn more. I remember when I took my first job, It's funny. I had two offers coming out of college. One was an opportunity at Pepsi-Cola, and they were offering me $29,000 a year. Yeah, you heard me, 29. You think you got a problem with money? Admittedly, this was back in 1989, but it was $29,000. I had a second offer from a company called Payne Weber, which was ultimately purchased by UBS during Two Investments, which is where I am today. And they offered me $29,500. So I had two jobs. I'm talking to you today about money now because of $500 difference. I guess if Pepsi had offered a $500 or $600 difference, then maybe I'd be talking to you about beverages right now. But that's the way I went. But I remember going and working in departments and working with people who I felt were just so much more qualified and knew more than me. But it was in that environment that I grew the most. So yes, it might be challenging. You might feel like the low man on the totem pole. You may feel like you are not qualified and you don't understand, but don't give up. Don't quit. Stay in that environment, grow and learn, because when you come out of it, you're going to be way better than you were before when you went in it. So hopefully that helps you on the 20 to maybe 29, 30, 31 level. Remember, the key there is prioritize learning over your living. Learning before excessive living. All right, let's hit the next one. People in the ages of, say, 30 to maybe 39, 40. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so now let's talk about people who are in the age range, say, between 30 and maybe 40 years of age. If you're in that spot, you're probably maybe looking at your first house. I think the average age now for people buying their first house is around 36 or 37, which is a lot later. You probably got kids, maybe you're starting a family, house, like it's just amazing the amount of things that you have to spend on when you're in your 30s, and it leaves very little room for anything else. The biggest financial issue for people in their 30s is managing lifestyle inflation, because you're probably starting to make a little bit more money, and in doing so, maybe you can start to feel a little richer. And that's where the trap is, I think, for the 30-year-olds, because maybe now you got that first promotion, you got that significant raise, and it's only natural to want to sort of step up in life, right? Step up to a bigger house, put the kids in private school, do all the things that are important. But the solution to that challenge is actually, before you step up your living, you step up your savings. So you got a $25,000 raise, or you just got a new bump and a new job. Before you step up in lifestyle, the benefit or the solution is step up your savings rate first. Once you step up your savings rate, do whatever you want with whatever's left. But that is going to be a really critical role in helping you to build wealth longer term. That's just been my experience, that you've got to find a way to step up your savings before you step up your living when you're in your 30s. And I know that's harder to do than sometimes than people might want to acknowledge, but it can be done. But it requires some reprioritization. Let me give you one area. This is going to sound a little controversial, but I believe it's to be true. Okay, you only got but so much money. And so when you talk about what you're going to spend on, you have to ask yourself, is it more important for you to fund your child's college education than your retirement? And there's a whole school of thinking out there. People like, hey, I want to help my child. And obviously it's going to cost money to do so. But I know so many parents who've done that. And in their 50s and 60s, they're struggling with retirement. And when you make a decision to finance your child's college education before your retirement, you are basically saying, I'm expecting my children to take care of me. I don't know if they know that, but that could be challenging. It might set you up for a whole world of hurt later on, not to mention that suddenly now your child has this financial responsibility of addressing your needs later in life. Wealthy families are wealthy in part because they pass wealth down. Parents get to a position financially where they pass the wealth of the home ownerships that they have, their 401ks and everything that they built asset-wise down to their children. People who are not wealthy actually do the opposite. They don't do the opposite. What they do is they pass down liabilities. So they're passing down, not necessarily debt, but they're passing down financial burdens, financial challenges. And whenever you make a decision in your 30s to say, hey, I want to start preparing for my child's college education, it's great. But if you're doing that at the expense of your own retirement, that could be very dangerous, not only for you, but even for your child. One of my friends, who is my financial advisor, shared this story with me to illustrate this point. He said, whenever you go on a plane and they go through the emergency procedures, they say, listen, If there is an emergency and these oxygen masks drop from the ceiling, you are to put the mask on yourself first and then your child. And it's like, it's sort of counterintuitive to what you might think would be good parenting. Right? Who would want to take care of your child first? Are you okay? And then I'll be okay. And that I think we're all instinctively bred that way. But they tell you this because if you don't have the mask on first, your child can't receive your help. Same thing with retirement. If you aren't setting yourself up for retirement, then you aren't going to be in a position to help your child. And that's probably a really important point to realize and recognize. Look, there are scholarships, there are loans, and there are backstops to a college education. You know what the backstop is to a retirement that you haven't funded? It's dependency on the government. And the second one is your child. So either you are choosing to be dependent on your child for your financial future or dependent on the government, and both might not be necessarily a good choice. So in your 30s, you have to make sure you still prioritize savings first. So the principle, again, is to step up savings before you step up living. And I know that's the pattern here. You might have caught this so far. In your 20s, it's like prioritize learning before living, excessive living. And in your 30s, it's like prioritize savings before you prioritize buying and spending, especially in excessive things. And again, if you're in a financial position where you've stepped up your savings, you could do those other things, that's great. But if you don't do that, you're going to find yourself in a really tough position later. It requires some prioritization on how to do that. But the people who are successful, they follow a simple pattern and they say, I take what I earn, I save a portion, and I live on what's left. People who are not in those positions or tend to not be wealthy, their mindset is, I take what I earn, I live off of it, and whatever is left after my living, I save. One leads to wealth, the other doesn't lead to wealth. It might lead to riches, and there is a big difference. Because you can see plenty of people who are rich because they live well, eat well, drive well, vacation well, but they are dependent on the job to maintain that lifestyle. Wealth is a completely different story. Wealth says, it doesn't matter what I'm driving, living, and wearing, or how I'm vacationing. I can do all of that, however frugal or however lavish I want, because I'm not depending on a job to do so. I'm depending on my assets. So you have two people who might make vastly different incomes. One might make twice as much as the other, but the one who is actually earning less might be wealthier. How? Well, because should both parties basically lose their jobs, one is now going to live off of assets that they've saved and built over time, and the other one hasn't done so as much. So you can literally have two people who literally are making vastly different incomes, and the richer person could actually be less wealthy. And again, wealth is basically the accumulation of assets from which you can live without dependency on a job to do so. And you really start to learn that and build that in your 30s, which requires prioritization at a time when literally you have so many things you want to do, you have to prioritize. And sometimes those choices are a little tough to make. But if you do that, you will set yourself up for success in your 40s in a way that you could have never done had you not done it. So let's talk about your 40s. So at your 40s, things are clicking a little better. Hopefully, you're starting to see your savings start to really work for you, and you've really built something, right? And you see it really growing. Now it's compounding, it's growing. The reality is that in your 40s, the biggest challenge that you face is being able to handle change.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Financial change. Lots of times in your 40s, you run into a situation where, you might have to change your job. Maybe your job's relocating, or maybe you're just being let go. In your 40s, you're trying to redefine with your relationship. Maybe your kids are now getting ready to head off to school. And so trying to just maintain and to grow what you have, protect what you have, is like really one of the biggest issues that I see for people in their 40s. It's no coincidence that in your 40s, a lot of people go through divorce. So how do you handle change in your 40s? Change of a job, change of your relationships, change of whatever it is that you're going through. You got to protect what you've built. And the solution is to constantly reinvest into the things that are important in your life, upgrading your skills, continually being up to speed on your skills, reinvesting in your relationship, because there's nothing more costly than a divorce, not just emotionally, not just spiritually, not just emotionally and mentally, but financially. So being able to reinvest and not expect these things to grow on autopilot on their own is really key. These things will never get there in terms of growth and development apart from you intentionally doing so. So I found that in your 40s, man, it's really just about making sure that you have hedges, that you have guardrails around the things that you've built over the last 20 years. Like you've been saving, you've been sacrificing, now you're starting to see something really grow. You got to put some hedges around that. Don't expose your family, your life, your choices to decisions that could lead to ruin. That's not the time to make major decisions that will put your family at risk, right? You've got now something to protect. So the biggest challenge there is, how do you handle change, whether it's change that you want to make or change that's forced on you? And the best preparation, or the best solution, is preparation. Reinvest and prepare to protect what you've been building over those last couple of decades, so now in your 40s. And then when you get in your 50s and 60s, I'm 60 years old, as I said, the biggest challenge for a lot of people who haven't done the things that I've mentioned in the years prior is the inability to retire. They just haven't prepared and saved. One of the biggest things that I say in your 50s and 60s is that time is no longer working as an ally and a support to you. Now time becomes almost an enemy, whereas time was your greatest ally in your 20s. It was a support in your 30s. In your 40s, it's about neutral, but in your 50s and 60s, time is against you. And one of the things that I often say is that if you don't have time, you better already have money, because you don't have time to help you get there. So in your 50s and 60s, it's about, if you haven't done the steps that you need to, you're just going to have to put in the extra work. You're going to have to invest more. You're going to have to put more money in, like 401k catch-up contributions. The market can't give you what you haven't allowed it to offer you earlier in life. And now we can't come to the market and say, hey, now make up for everything that I haven't given you an opportunity to do for me. Do it all now in these last 10 years. That's really hard, and one that might expose you to great risk. So what you have to do is that to get to your financial goals at this point is you have to just literally prioritize everything towards savings. Things that you could have done earlier that might have given you a smoother glide path. Now that road and that delta is like this. It's just straight up. You've got to put in as much money as you can to get to a goal of savings that financially will provide for you in retirement. And then the other thing is that when you're in your 60s, the other piece is that longevity risk, right? It's being healthy enough and having enough energy to enjoy the things that you have built over the last 20 to 30 years. I know so many people who said, you don't wait till your 70s and 80s before you choose to start living off all the things you built in retirement. Start doing those in your 50s and 60s, because in your later on, you just don't know if you're going to be around to do that, or if you're going to have the kind of energy and to do so. So in your 60s and your 50s and 60s, it's about eating well, living well, less stress, and enjoying the things that you've built, and allowing that to glide you through those latter years of life. At least that's my approach. Like, travel more, do more with your family, do the things that are really important, and use the assets you have. There was a book I had read not too long ago called Dying with Zero. And that was the basic premise. It's like, listen, after you take care of your basic needs and family considerations, like, you should live with zero. Take the resourcing that you work so hard for and enjoy yourself. Give to family, or maybe give to others. Whatever it is, the point is that wealth that you've been storing and growing, now it's time to deploy it in a way that brings life to you and your family, your communities, and those around you. And that's where you want to be in your 60s. You want to get to that place. So if you're in your 50s and 60s and you're not quite there, the key is to continually contribute, to prioritize everything that you didn't do before. Now, this is the total priority, as much as I can into the market, but don't expose yourself to excessive risk. And if you do that, you'll find yourself being able to hopefully enjoy this latter part of your life. So those are the biggest things that I've seen from 20 to 60 years of age now. I can't comment about 70 yet, but I can tell you about 60s and what happened to me and my lifestyle prior to that. Hopefully some of the things that I've shared have been beneficial for you, help level set, maybe challenge some of your thinking about what you want to do and what you need to do for your own life. I'd love to see your comments about other things that maybe I've missed that should be addressed. Either way, my hope and my prayer is that for you and your family, despite whatever age bracket you're in and where you are in your journey, you recognize and will put into place the practices that will make you successful in the season in which you live. Because people ask me, what's the secret to success of life? The secret is understanding the secret for the season that you're in. because the secret that you use in your 20s won't work in your 40s, and what you're dealing with in your 30s, you're going to see something different in your 60s. So take the lesson learned for each season, and over a lifetime, you'll find that you did all well.